Alright, so I'm not here today, so you're going to watch a video of me teaching a lesson. Before we start, we need to do a couple of things. First, um, whenever I say pause in the video, you need to make sure that you pause the video. And if I ask you to write down something specifically in your guided note sheet, you need to make sure that you do those things. Um, if you don't and you show the substitute an empty guided note sheet, you're not going to be able to move on to the next activity. Okay, she's going to look at your note sheet in order to move you on to the next activity. Before we get started, write down today's homework and make sure you circle the homework page for tonight. So tonight you need to do the 6.9 home link, and that's page 235. That is homework, so make sure you circle that page in your packet. Also, before we begin, you'll need your guided note paper, you'll need your notebook, and you'll need your math journal for this lesson, most likely. So pause the video, get those things out. Alright, since you have those things out, our goal today is to learn two strategies for solving decimal multiplication problems. One strategy we already talked about, we already learned, we did that on Thursday. So today, really, I'm just going to introduce one new strategy for you. Before I introduce that new strategy, though, let's just briefly review the first strategy on how we can multiply decimals. So one way, if I had the problem 6 8/10 times 2 1/10, the three things or three steps that we're going to do is first, we're going to make an estimate. Second, we're going to multiply as if the factors were whole numbers. And then third, we're going to use that estimate to place the decimal point. So pause the video and write these three steps down in your guided note paper where it says, what are the three steps to multiplying decimals in strategy 1? So pause the video, do that. All right, now that you've paused the video and that you have these written down, let's go ahead and do this. So our first step is to make an estimate. So 6 8/10 times 2 1/10. I can estimate 6 8/10 to be close to 7. And I can multiply 2 1/10 to be close to 2. So my estimate could be 7 times 2 equals 14. Pause the video and write that estimate in your guided note paper. All right, now that you have your estimate, our second step is we're going to multiply as if the factors were whole numbers. So 6 8/10, I'm just going to ignore the decimal point and keep all of the digits in that number and make that 68 times 2 1/10. I'm going to ignore the decimal point and make that 21. So I'm going to do 68 times 21. Pause the video and set up your multiplication problem just like that. All right, so now that you have your problem set up, make sure you're doing the steps with me. So our first step is to multiply 1 times 8. So 1 times 8 is 8. And then multiply my 1 times 6. 1 times 6 is 6. So my first product, 68. Now I need to multiply my 2 or my 20. But before I do that, I need to make sure I have a 0 in my ones place. It's my placeholder. Okay. Now I could just multiply the digits. So let's do that. 2 times 8 is 16. Put your 6 down here. Carry your 1. 2 times 6 is 12, plus 1 is 13. So that's your second product. Now we just add these up. So 8 plus 0 is 8. 6 plus 6 is 12. Carry 1. 3 plus 1 is 4. And then my 1 over here plus nothing is 1. So now this is the number that I came up with, okay? And now I need to use my estimate to help me place my decimal point within this number. So if my estimate is close to 14, the only logical place for me to place this decimal point is right between here, the 4 and the 2. So 14 and 28 hundredths is my answer. So go ahead and make sure you place your decimal point in there, pause the video, and make sure you have all of this in here. All right, so that was a brief review of strategy 1. You should have that in your guided notes now. Let's move on to our second strategy. So if you guys look at this number here, what I'm trying to multiply, I have 73 thousandths times 2 hundredths. So if I'm thinking about my three steps, make an estimate, multiply as if the factors were whole numbers, 73 thousandths times 2 hundredths is a little difficult to make an estimate with. I can use some number sense in what I know about multiplication though. I know that 2 hundredths is less than 1, So my product, my answer, should be less than my first factor here of 73 thousandths. So whenever I'm multiplying this, I should get an answer that's less than 73 thousandths since this factor is less than 1 whole. So strategy 2, again, we have 3 steps, all right? First, we're actually going to multiply both of our factors by a power of 10 to make them whole numbers. So same idea as strategy 1, we still want to get whole numbers here, but for something like this, I can multiply by a power of 10 to get there. So one important point, though, is to keep track of the powers of 10, or the total number of places that the decimal point is shifting or moving, all right? Our second step is, once we end up with our whole numbers after multiplying them by powers of 10, is we're going to multiply the whole numbers. And then thirdly, our last step is to undo the multiplication by powers of 10. Pause the video and write down our steps in strategy 2 in your guided notes paper. All right, now that you have the steps written down, let's actually do this, okay? And with the practice, we're going to go through some practice examples. I think you'll get the hang of it. So our first step is to multiply both factors by a power of 10 to make them whole numbers. So I have 73 thousandths. And let's think about it. To get to a whole number for 73 thousandths, my decimal point needs to move to the right 3 places. 1, 2, 3, and now I would have the number 73. So 1, 2, 3. So if I moved it 3 places to the right, that's like multiplying it by 1,000, or 10 to the 3rd power. So 73 thousandths times 10 to the 3rd power is simply 73. Now I need to multiply my second factor, my 2 hundredths, all right? So if I multiply 2 hundredths, 0 and 2 hundredths here, I need to think, how's my decimal point going to move to get to a whole number? Well, it needs to move 2 places to the right here. 1, 2. Or that's like saying times 10 to the 2nd power, or 100. So if I multiply 2 hundredths times 10 to the 2nd power, I end up with 2. Pause the video and make sure you have this just like I do on your guided note sheet. All right, now that you have that, our second step is to multiply the whole numbers. So let's set up 73 times 2, just like this. 73 times 2. Set it up and down, just like that. You may pause the video to do that. Now that you have that done, let's multiply 73 times 2. Is a pretty basic multiplication problem. 73 times 2 is 3 times 2 is 6. 7 times 2 is 14. So we get 146 here. But we know that's not my answer because I was really multiplying 73 thousandths times 2 hundredths. So let's look at step 3. It says to undo the multiplication by powers of 10. So what I mean by that is we had to keep track of how many times our decimal point was moving. For 73 thousandths, I moved it 3 places to the right. So in this number, my decimal point's here. I need to move my decimal point back 3 places, but instead of the right, I need to go to the left because I need to undo it. So I'm going to move it 1, 2, 3. And I also moved my decimal point 2 places to the right in 2 hundredths to get to 2. So I need to move my decimal point another 2 places to the left. 1, 2. And that's where my new decimal point is. So 73 thousandths times 2 hundredths is 146 hundred thousandths. All right, and that answer totally makes sense because it's less than the 73 thousandths that I began with. And I knew my product was going to be less than what I started with since I was multiplying it by a number less than 1. All right, so pause the video, make sure you undo your decimal points just like I did, and when you're ready to move on to our next example, do that. But pause the video, make sure you have all of this down. All right, so let's do a second example, and I think with this second example, I think this will help you a little bit more, okay? So my first step is to multiply 12 and 6 tenths times 2 and 75 hundredths. But before I do that, I want to remember that I want to multiply both factors by a power of 10 to make them whole numbers. So 12 and 6 tenths. I need to think, well, how can I multiply that by a power of 10 to get to a whole number? Well, to do that, my decimal point's just going to move one place to the right. So I need to multiply it by 10 to the first power, and I get 126. And remember, I need to multiply my second factor also by a power of 10 to make it a whole number. So I have 2 and 75 hundredths. And I need to think, how's my decimal point going to move here? Well, it'll move 2 places here to the right to get to 275. So I need to multiply 2 and 75 hundredths times 10 to the second power to get 275. And remember, I want to keep track of how many times my decimal point's moving. So I moved 1 place to the right here, and then I moved it 2 places to the right here. So I moved a total of 3 times to the right. So now I'm going to multiply the whole numbers. So I have 126 times 275. If you want to set up this problem in your notebook to give you some more room, because I know there's not a whole lot of space on your note sheet, you may do that. All right, but pause the video and make sure you have all of this done in your guided note sheet before we move on. So pause the video and make sure you have all this written down in your note sheet. All right, so now that you're ready, let's actually multiply our whole numbers. So we're in step 2 still. So my first step is to multiply my 5-digit in 275 by all the digits in 126. So 5 times 6 is 30. So put 0, carry my 3 here. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 3 is 13. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. All right. Now I need to multiply my 7 in 275 by all the digits in 126. But before I do that, since this is in the tens place, I need to make sure I append a 0 here. And so it's holding that place. So 7 times 6 is 42. Put down my 2, carry my 4. 7 times 2 is 14, plus 4 is 18. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 1 is 8. So there's my second product. And now finally, since I'm multiplying a 3-digit by a 3-digit number, I need to multiply my 2 in 275 by all the digits in 126. And to do that, since this is in the hundreds place, I need to make sure that I append 2 zeros before I start to multiply. So now I can go. 2 times 6 is 12. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. And then 2 times 1 is 2. And now I need to add up all of my products here. So 0 plus 0 plus 0 is 0. 3 plus 2 is 5. 8 plus 2 is 10. Plus 1 is, or plus 6 is 16. 8 plus 5 is 13. Plus 1 is 14. Carry by 1. 2 plus 1 is 3. So here's the number that I ended up with after I did step 2 of multiplying my whole numbers. But I can't forget step 3. Undo the multiplication by powers of 10. So this is where my decimal point would be after multiplying my whole numbers here. But I gotta remember, I multiplied 12 and 6 tenths times 10 to the first power, and I multiplied 2 and 75 hundredths times 10 to the second power. So I moved 1 place to the right here and 2 places to the right here for a total of 3 places to the right. So I need to make sure that I move it back 3 places to the left. 1, 2, 3. So this is where my decimal point is. So really, my answer is 34 and 650 thousandths. So 12 and 6 tenths equals 34 and 650 thousandths. And I could do an estimate for this problem. Okay, this one would be easy to estimate. 13, I could make 12 and 6 tenths 13. 2 and 75 hundredths is about 3. And 13 times 3 is 39, which is close to 34 and 650 thousandths. So this method definitely works. Pause the video and make sure that you undo your decimal and undo the multiplication by powers of 10 and that you write down the answer. Okay, so pause the video and make sure you do that. All right, so let's do our final example. All right, so here I have 2 and 45 hundredths and I want to multiply it by 65 hundredths. Again, if I look at my second factor here, it's less than 1, so my product should end up being less than 2 and 45 hundredths, all right? So let's think about all of the steps that we have to do. Well, my first step is to make sure that I multiply both factors by a power of 10 to make them whole numbers. And I want to make sure I keep track of the powers of 10 or the total number of places that the decimal point is moving. All right, so 2 and 45 hundredths, and I want to multiply this by 10, and it looks like it's going to move 2 places to the right, so 10 to the second power, okay, because my decimal point will move 1, 2 places to the right here to get 245, so that's now a whole number. And I need to multiply my second factor by a power of 10. So I have 65 hundredths here. And I need to think, well, this will also move 2 places to the right. So that's a total of 3, 4 places to the right that it moved. And so I need to multiply 65 hundredths also by 10 to the second power, which would get me 65. All right. So pause the video and make sure you have step 1 done. All right, so step 2 is to multiply the whole number. So again, I have 245, and I'm going to multiply that by 65. Again, if you want to use your notebook to multiply this out, because there's not a whole lot of room on your note sheet, that's fine, but pause the video and set this up. All right, so let's multiply. All right, so I'm going to first multiply my 5 and 65 by all the digits in 245. So 5 times 5 is 25. Carry my 2. 5 times 4 is 20, plus 2 is 22. Put down my 2, carry my 2. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12. All right, so before I multiply my 6, or really my 60, in 245, I need to make sure that I put my placeholder down here, my 0. Okay, append a 0 here. And now I can multiply my 6 by all the digits in 245. So 6 times 5 is 30. Carry my 3. 6 times 4 is 24, plus 3 is 27. 6 times 2 is 12, plus 2 is 14. And now I need to make sure that I'm adding up my 2 products I came up with. 5 plus 0 is 5. 2 plus 0 is 2. 2 plus 7 is 9. 4 plus 1 is 5. And 1 plus 0 is 1. All right, so pause the video. Make sure that you have all of this done, or step 2 of multiplying the whole numbers. So pause the video. Make sure that it's all correct in your notebook or on your note sheet. All right, now that you've done that, we need to do our last step. Undo the multiplication by powers of 10. Well, remember, I'm really multiplying 2 and 45 hundredths times 65 hundredths. So I moved my decimal point 2 places to the right in 2 and 45 hundredths to get the whole number of 245. And I moved my decimal point 2 places to the right in 65 hundredths to get to the whole number of 65. So my decimal, I need to undo that multiplication of powers of 10. So my decimal is going to move a total of 4 places to the left, since I moved 2 places here and 2 places here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So really my answer is 1 and 5,925 ten thousandths. All right, so Really, my answer is 1 and 5,925 10,000ths. And if I'm just thinking about it, this answer makes sense because I know that my product should be less than 2 and 45 hundredths since I was multiplying it by a factor that is less than 1. All right. So the tricky part of strategy 2 is just making sure that you undo the multiplication by powers of 10 when you are done multiplying your whole numbers. All right, so that's why you want to keep track of how many times your decimal point moved when you're making your factors whole numbers. So, to do, make sure you show the substitute your guided notes. If everything looks complete and looks okay, then you're going to do journal page 220, which is independent. All right, show the teacher when you're done with that. Then you're going to do journal page 199, 210, or 195 if you have not finished those yet. And then you can work on Khan Academy skills if all of those pages are done. Just real quick before you begin here, page 220, these multiplication problems are actually the same as 219, but they just want you to make sure that you're practicing strategy 2. And it's a good, easy way to compare your answers to 219. If you didn't get the same answer, then you know you must have made a mistake somewhere along the way. All right, just make sure that you're following the steps. All right, use your notebook, please, to be multiplying your whole number so you can keep your digits lined up in those columns. All right, so you might want to pause the video on the to-do list so you know exactly what you can be doing. But that's the end of the lesson, and just practice those skills. If you're still having trouble with it, that's fine. Maybe write down your questions and what you're having trouble with so I can help you a little later, or go to a friend or ask the teacher to help you. All right, boys and girls, off you go.